textbook edition of Nelson, I remember still one sentence that it is a controversial topic or controversial issue. Welcome, Dr. Srinivas Murki. So Nelson has written that it is a controversial issue. Statement is again controversial and debatable. So you are the best judge at that time. So now let us listen from today's talk. How many
Hello, sir.
things we hear?
Hello.
Hello,
Good
Dr.
evening, sir.
Srinivas. Good
Good
evening.
evening, sir. Good evening.
We welcome you all to this second lecture of webinar master series. And we thank Lucknow Neonatology Foundation for starting this academic feast. Today's moderator, we have with us Dr. Sanjay Niranjan, who is the present IAP executive member from Lucknow. He has been a past president of Lucknow Neonatology Foundation. He has also been heading multiple national and state academies. He is trained from KGMU. Sir has been organizing secretary of UP in Neocon, which had more than 2000 participation. Sir has also organized UP Pedicon 2013 and has been joint secretary. Sir has also organized UP Respicon and multiple other workshops on neurodisability. And today's speaker needs no introduction. I think there won't be a single participant who doesn't know Srinivas sir. And I must confess that today, whatever I know of neonatology is because of sir. He has been my guru, my mentor, a friend. Sir has trained almost more than 100 neonatologists across the country, across the length and breadth of India, from North Kashmir to Kanyakumari and East to West. Sir is not only a able clinician, but also a researcher par excellence. Sir has been chief consultant and director academics of Parmita Children Hospital. Sir has been a lead researcher of multiple landmark trials. Sir also has recently started DNB neonatology in Parmita Children Hospital, and Sir's interest includes non-invasive ventilation, jaundice, low-cost interventions. In fact, there is no non-invasive workshop across the country where Sir is not part of. Sir is very fond among students because no matter what topic it is, Sir makes it very simple and lucid. In fact, I can go on, and but still I won't be able to tell you Sir's achievements. I owe you, sir, whatever I am today is because of you. My gratitude and warm welcome from Lucknow Neonatology Foundation and all the panelists. We welcome you, sir.
Thank you, Akash, and thank you, Lucknow Neonatology Forum, for inviting me to this wonderful webinar. So I don't know whether I deserve all those accolades, but I continue to do whatever is deserving from my side. So I think it's an opportunity to get good students and also opportunity to spread the knowledge of neonatology. And we want more and more neonatologists to do good work, because ultimately the newborn is going to benefit from all of us. Thank you, Dr. Sanjay sir, for being part of for moderating this session, and also for being part of Lucknow Neonatology Forum webinars.
So thank you,
So,
Dr. Srinivas. I just formally invite you to present your talk. Thank you. Go ahead.
thank you, sir. So should I go ahead, sir?
Yes, yes.
So the topic which has been given to me is approach to a newborn with prolonged jaundice. So I will try to delve this topic in these headings. The definition of prolonged jaundice. So whenever jaundice is prolonged, more than 2 weeks or more than 3 weeks in a baby, term and preterm baby, immediate question we should arise to our mind is it cholestatic or unconjugated jaundice? Because the etiology of prolonged unconjugated jaundice and the management of prolonged unconjugated jaundice is totally different compared to prolonged conjugated jaundice. So if it is a cholestatic jaundice or a conjugate jaundice which is conjugate bilirubin, we need to know the causes. And again here, we need to differentiate cholestatic jaundice with liver cell failure, which means sick and non-sick babies, and how do we approach the diagnosis for cholestatic jaundice and what is there in the management. So first we'll discuss these issues, and then we'll look at one case which will highlight the approach to cholestatic jaundice. So jaundice is said to be prolonged when it lasts for more than 2 weeks in term babies and more than 3 weeks in preterm infants. Preterm, I mean less than 37 weeks. So the moment jaundice is prolonged, immediately it should come to your mind whether it is cholestasis or not. Because if it's a prolonged jaundice and cholestasis, it's our prime responsibility to rule out extrahepatic biliary atresia and then refer to the pediatric surgeon as early as possible, because the outcomes of EHBA surgery are excellent if the surgery is done very early during the early stage of EHBA. So what is the prolonged jaundice features which help us to tell it is cholestasis or cholestatic jaundice? So it is a pale stools, that the stools are white in color, staining of diapers, and this we need to understand that the diapers, if they're using cloth diapers and if they're washing the diapers, the yellow stain still persists, that is staining of diapers. Lemon yellow jaundice, so slightly a different color of jaundice, but if you look at this once or twice, you will understand that this is a different jaundice than other jaundice which you normally see. If you have done an investigation, any direct bilirubin more than 1 milligram per deciliter when the TSB is less than 5, and more than 20% of the total serum bilirubin when the bilirubin is more than 5. So this is a thumb rule to tell us that yes, there is a cholestatic jaundice. The other important or a bedside test is urine bile salt bile pigment. If it is positive, we know that definitely baby has a cholestatic jaundice. So as I said, any prolonged jaundice, first rule out cholestatic jaundice. If it is not cholestatic jaundice, you think of prolonged unconjugate jaundice. Now, prolonged jaundice which is not cholestatic jaundice is actually the physiological type of jaundice which we see, or the pathological jaundice which gets prolonged, and this is mostly unconjugated jaundice. So I said in unconjugated, the stool color is normal, diaper staining is not going to be there. Normally these children are healthy otherwise, and the causes are mostly hemolysis, that is ABO, RH and other isoimmunization like minor blood group, or it could be hemolysis, non-immune hemolysis like G6PD deficiency, hereditary sporocytosis, pyropoikilocytosis. The second thing you have to think of, is there any blood collection? Examine for cephalhematoma, subgaleal bleeds or any internal bleeds. Sometimes there could be a retroperitoneal bleed or there could be intracranial hemorrhage which may be missed initially because of the subtle signs. But never forget to evaluate a child with prolonged jaundice for hypothyroidism. Take it as an opportunity to evaluate for hypothyroidism. Any child with prolonged jaundice, do a thyroid function test. Maybe even if you pick up, even if the hypothyroidism is the reason for 5% of this jaundice, it is worth it, because the life of the child is saved, the neuromorbidities are avoided. So in all prolonged jaundice, please rule out hypothyroidism. Take it as an opportunity to rule out, because screening should be done whether they have other features of hypothyroidism or not. The other features of hypothyroidism in the neonatal period are mottling, open posterior fontanelle or a wide anterior fontanelle, abdominal fullness or distension, inguinal hernias or umbilical hernias. So these are other symptoms may be present or may not be present, but prolonged jaundice could be the only feature of hypothyroidism. One another very important diagnosis which is should be considered is, if you don't find a cause, is urinary tract infection. We have seen many children with prolonged jaundice. If you evaluate for UTI, urine pus cells are going to be more than 10 per high power field. The albuminuria could be there, nitrates could be positive, and you could see if you do a liver function, there could be mild elevation of SGOT, SGPT. Doesn't fall into classical hepatitis, but there will be mild elevation of SGOT and SGPT. So these combination of features, you can easily say that this baby has a UTI, and urinary tract infection in newborns can present as prolonged unconjugated jaundice. The last one is breast milk jaundice. This jaundice is directly or indirectly related to breastfeeding, but I would suggest that don't label this jaundice as breast milk jaundice and try to tell the mother that mother's milk has caused this jaundice. It has more social connotations, so I would prefer to avoid it, because anyway the treatment is not going to be stopping breast milk. Never stop breastfeeding in any baby who has prolonged jaundice. You treat the jaundice. Even if you want to give phototherapy, do it. You want to use phenobarbital for prolonged jaundice, sometimes you do it, but never blame breastfeeding or breast milk, because once you do it, the family is going to curse the mother, and that is going to have long lasting implications. So I would never stop breastfeeding for any jaundice which is prolonged, which is unconjugated. Only time when you have to stop breastfeeding is galactosemia. Otherwise, there is no contraindication for breastfeeding at any point of time. Now, if you have ruled out these common things, hemolysis, blood collections, hypothyroidism, UTI, you may bounce upon a very rare variety of prolonged unconjugated jaundice, that is the Gilbert syndrome and Crigler-Najjar type 2. Now, if it is Crigler-Najjar type 2, they will present with marked prolonged jaundice, which is unconjugated, and will respond, some of them may respond dramatically to phenobarbital. So, type 2 Crigler-Najjar could respond to phenobarbital. So, keep these points in your mind. I said prolonged unconjugated jaundice, please rule out hypothyroidism. Urinary tract infection could be an important diagnosis which you can make, but never stop breastfeeding if the jaundice get prolonged. Treat the jaundice, but not avoid breastfeeding. So, if there is features of cholestasis, white stools, hepatomegaly, lemon yellow eyes, diaper staining, conjugated bilirubin high, and bile salt bile pigment positive, immediately you have to rule out liver cell failure, because the causes of liver cell failure are different from causes of cholestasis. And how do you know the child has liver cell failure or an infant has liver cell failure? By encephalopathy and bleeding diastasis. There could be petechia, there could be ecchymosis, there could be bleeding tendency, and the child looks dull, inactive, lethargic, has cholestatic jaundice, and mostly also has hepatosplenomegaly. So these are very few important causes we have to rule out because some of them are treatable causes. Herpes is an important cause of liver cell failure in the newborn neonatal period. These children usually present with liver cell failure after the first 5 days with disseminated form of herpes. They will have hepatomegaly, they will have marked elevation of enzymes, they'll also have proteinuria, they will have coagulopathy and encephalopathy and seizures. So herpes should always be considered if the baby was well in the first 5 days, and then after 5 days the baby continues to have encephalopathy, seizures, and underlying cholestasis and hepatitis is there, or liver cell failures. Herpes should be ruled out because herpes is treatable. The earlier you diagnose it, the better are the outcomes. Enteroviruses, these days we are seeing this as one of the important causes of cholestatic jaundice and liver cell failure. And sepsis, Klebsiella, E. coli, all of them, because underlying sepsis, you will anyway be able to diagnose sepsis because they will have sepsis features and liver cell failure, or hepatitis features and liver cell failure, and other features of infection like sclerema or dusky peripheries or bleeding tendencies, and your screen should be positive and your cultures could be positive. Then you think of infection as the cause of cholestasis. So you have seen here bacterial, viral, and sometimes fungal infections can also cause cholestasis, but usually they do not land with liver cell failure. If it is not an infection, think of galactosemia, because if it is infection also we have to rule out galactosemia. Like I said, you rule out hypothyroidism in prolonged jaundice, always rule out galactosemia and cause all children who have cholestatic jaundice, because again it's a treatable cause. Simple bedside test is urine reducing substance. So how do we do that? Baby has hypoglycemia, baby has cholestatic jaundice, may have coagulopathy, and if you do the urine examination, he could have E. coli sepsis or UTI features could be there, and you have to prove that there is urine reducing substance are positive. So when you do the glucose sticks will give you the positivity of glucose in the sugar, but for reducing substance you have to do a Benedict test. Benedict test will be positive if it is glucosuria or galactosemia or galactosuria. So if your Benedict test is positive, but if a glucose stick is negative, most likely it is a case of galactosuria. That's a simple bedside test. Otherwise, screening tests like galactose levels can be done, or you can look for enzyme, quantitative enzyme analysis in galactosemia. Tyrosinemia, this is another very important cause of liver cell failure. In the neonatal period, the babies could present as liver cell failure, hepatomegaly, hepatitis, encephalopathy, bleeding. Some other important features of tyrosinemia, if it presents little late, is features of renal tubular acidosis. Proximal renal tubular acidosis. These babies could have acidosis, proteinuria, glucosuria, phosphaturia could be there along with cholestatic jaundice. The third variety we now is coming up, an important cause of liver cell failure or cholestatic jaundice with liver cell failure is gestational alloimmune liver disease. This is equivalent to Rh isoimmunization. Rh isoimmunization affects the RBCs, gestational alloimmune liver disease affects the liver cells, and these could present as liver cell failure on day 1 of life also. And here the important features are these babies have early liver cell failure. They have moderate elevation of enzymes. They could be 2 times or 3 times elevated, but there is already features of liver cell failure. Hepatitis doesn't look so severe, but the baby is sick. Baby has coagulopathy. And other important features to help you are high levels of ferritin, could be more than 1000 or more than 2000 ferritin. So if you have high ferritin, liver cell failure, we used to consider as hemochromatosis was the previous name for this disease. Now we call it as GALT or gestational alloimmune liver disease. It is important to diagnose this disease because some of them are amenable to treatment with immunoglobulins. The next varieties are the bile acid synthetic defects. They can also present with liver cell failure in the first 4 weeks of life, and anytime during the first 4 weeks of life. Mostly they present with cholestasis, but some of them can also present with liver cell failure. A very important clue for bile acid synthetic defects is your GGT levels are going to be low. Normally you expect GGT to be higher in cholestatic jaundice, but in these conditions they could be normal or low. Low GGT is an important clinical as well as lab feature which will help you to diagnose bile acid synthetic defects as well as PFSI type 2. So progressive familial intrahepatic cholestasis type 2 also has low GGT. Mitochondrial disorders can also have cholestatic liver disease with failure, and here the baby will have again severe metabolic acidosis. There could be multi-organ injury, and lactates are going to be very high. When the lactate is more than 90 milligrams per deciliter, most likely it is a case of mitochondrial liver disease. When the lactate is more than 90 milligram per deciliter, most likely it is a case of mitochondrial disorders. And to diagnose this, you do a pyruvate to lactate ratio, and that will help you to find out whether it is a mitochondrial respiratory electron chain defect or cytoplasmic defect of the cell. And the last one is hemophagocytosis. Hemophagocytosis could be 2 types, post-infectious or it could be a primary. Post-infections is much more common hemophagocytosis. This could also present with pancytopenia, or sometimes with leukocytosis, thrombocytopenia, anemia, two cell lines affected, hepatomegaly, liver bleeding diabetes, hepatomegaly, enzymes are elevated. Ferritin is high again in this condition, but there is going to be low fibrinogen. Low fibrinogen, high ferritin, hepatosplenomegaly, markedly elevated enzymes, and bicytopenia or pancytopenia are features of hemophagocytosis. And you have to do a liver biopsy or a skin biopsy or a bone marrow to find out the activated macrophages in the bone marrow. So most of us do bone marrow to diagnose hemophagocytosis. Again, very important to diagnose because some of them are amenable to treatment with steroids or with immunoglobulins. So these are some important things in a sick child with liver cell failure cholestasis. Never forget to rule out herpes, a treatable cause. Always look for urine reducing substance. Gestational alloimmune liver disease, moderate enzyme elevation, but sick child and coagulopathy, liver cell failure. Ferritin is going to be high. Bile acid synthetic defect, low GGT, mitochondrial disorders, very high lactate, and hemophagocytosis, bicytopenia or pancytopenia or leukocytosis, and high ferritin and low fibrinogen. These are very important clues, clinical as well as lab clues, which help us to make a diagnosis of liver cell failure in newborns. Now, the other way to approach is if you have a well baby or a sick baby. If you have a cholestatic jaundice who is otherwise baby is looking well, growing well, most likely you're dealing with extrahepatic causes. Extrahepatic causes, most likely babies are going to be well babies. They grow well, they look normal, they're vigorously feeding. And if you have a pale or white stool, always rule out extrahepatic biliary atresia. White stool is almost a very, very important clinical tool to say that we have to rule out extrahepatic biliary atresia. The second thing is cause of well baby with cholestatic jaundice without liver cell failure is inspissated bile syndrome. This will happen in babies who have acute hemolysis, RH, ABO, or acute hemolysis. Initially, you treated with high jaundice, you treated with phototherapy, intensive phototherapy, or you did exchange transfusion, and later on the baby has cholestatic jaundice. Very likely it is a case of inspissated bile syndrome. You don't have to do much for this. you treat like cholestasis, and enteral feeding if you promote, and if you give lot of feeds for this baby breastfeeding, it will automatically resolve by itself. But during the time of cholestasis, you can supplement with multivitamins, vitamin K, and other medicines which are required for cholestatics. PFIC 1 and 2, these children present slightly in a older neonate, but the very important clues is itching. If a newborn is itching and cholestasis, very likely you are dealing with a case of progressive familial intrahepatic cholestasis. Cholestatic cyst could be diagnosed. They could be a well baby with a mass abdomen, right paragastric area, and then you are dealing with a case of cholestatic jaundice, cholestatic cyst. Ultrasound is very simple. It will pick up almost all the case of cholestatic cyst. Alagille syndrome, a syndromic baby with cholestatic jaundice. This is one important cholestatic jaundice. There are only two syndromes. One of them is Alagille syndrome. The other one is Agenese syndrome. In Agenese syndrome, cholestasis with lymphedema is there. In Alagille syndrome, they will have posterior emprotoxin, vertebral defects, and they will have cholestasis. And the cholestasis in Alagille syndrome is because of paucity of bile ducts, intrahepatic biliary problem. We also see a lot of cholestasis in preterm babies. This is TPN related cholestasis, where the baby looks otherwise well, mild to moderate elevation of enzymes, but mostly it is a jaundice related to inspission. And sometimes it can be related to hepatitis. We know that now using SMOF, that is the soya, MCT, olive oil, and fish oil together has reduced the incidence of TPN related cholestasis. Hypo and hyperthyroidism. Although hypothyroidism presents with prolonged unconjugated jaundice, but in a well baby with cholestatic jaundice, you should also rule out hypothyroidism. So hypothyroidism should be ruled out in all children with jaundice, prolonged jaundice. Hyperthyroidism, rare varieties of hyperthyroidism can also present as cholestatic jaundice. We did report a case of hyperthyroidism presenting as cholestatic jaundice in our hospital maybe a few years back, and I know Akash must have remembered that case. Bile acid synthetic defects could present as liver cell failure, or it could present as a cholestatic jaundice in a well baby. Now, if it is a sick baby, we already discussed those points where liver cell failure is going to happen. Sick baby means infections, galactosemia, tyrosinemia, GALD, and rarely it can happen in alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, cystic fibrosis also. Hypopituitarism is also said as a presentation, but I think the sickness is mostly because of hypoglycemia. I have not seen hypopituitarism presenting as cholestatic jaundice, but maybe Dr. Sanjay sir or somebody else should have seen hypopituitarism as an important cause of cholestasis or sick baby cholestasis. So the clinical clues are, if you have recurrent cases of cholestasis or family history of cholestasis is there, that means a genetic component is there. Here you have to think of progressive familial intrahepatic cholestasis, alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, Agenese syndrome, and benign recurrent intrahepatic cholestasis. So these are the four differentials you should keep in your mind when recurrent in the same family they are having cholestasis again and again. Now remember that in all these four, most of them are not going to be there. They look relatively well babies. Agenese lymphedema will be there. Alpha-1, initially they'll have cholestasis, later in life they'll have lung diseases. PFIC, itching. And BRIC, usually the presence of, it will be some periods of cholestasis, asymptomatic period, and then cholestasis. If you have IUGR, babies growth restricted, they have hepatosplenomegaly and rashes on the face, on the trunk, rule out torch infections. Toxo, rubella, CMV can present as torch infections. They may have liver cell failure in the extreme cases, but most of them can present only with cholestatic jaundice. So, but they will always have underlying features like hepatosplenomegaly, intrauterine growth restriction, or rashes like the blueberry muffins, which are nodular lesions which are seen on the face or rest of the body. They are nothing but extra erythropoietic extra bone marrow hemopoiesis. If you have cataract, hepatomegaly, hypoglycemia, and E. coli UTI, think of galactosemia. Now, very important thing is, if hypoglycemia occurs after feeding, then very likely it is galactosemia. Fasting, hypoglycemia disappears, then you can easily say that this is not galactosemia. Normally we see fasting hypoglycemia, but in galactosemia, fasting will cause normalization of sugars. If you feed the baby, baby lands with hypoglycemia. If the presence of cherry red spot, always get an eye examination babies with cholestatic, because if cherry red spot is there and splenomegaly is there, not much of hepatomegaly, it could be a case of Niemann-Pick type C. Dysmorphic babies, we have said Alagille syndrome. So this is a typical Alagille syndrome where you are seeing a prosioembrotoxin and a vertebral defect and a typical phases of Alagille syndrome. We have already discussed the Agenus syndrome where lymphedema is going to be there. Trisomy 13-18-1 can also have their clear-cut diagnosis. Leprosaunism sometimes can present with cholestatic jaundice. Here they will have insulin resistance, severe hyperglycemia, diabetes like picture, and cholestasis. And these children could have loss of adiposity in the body. Mainly the scapula, they look very thin, but they have insulin resistance. Minky-Kinky hair syndrome, Zellweger and Lowe syndrome are rare causes of cholestasis. I put it just to complete the list. Again, the lab clues, ultrasound is the first investigation we would like to get after the LFTs, because ultrasound can rule out almost all the extrahepatic biliary causes. Choledochal cyst can be ruled out, Carol's cyst can be ruled out. Some important clues for EHBA on the ultrasound are the gallbladder length less than 1.5 centimeters, the contractility of the gallbladder, if it is there, it is not there, or hypoplastic gallbladder, and triangular cord sand. These are some very important things of clues for diagnosing EHBA. EHBA is mostly a diagnosis of exclusion. You rule out all other causes and then do a para-op cholangiogram, and then if it is confirms to be a EHBA, then you go for a Kasai. LFT is a very, very important investigation because a lot of clues come from that. Elevated GGT and SGOT is an obstructive cause. Low GGT, I've already discussed, bile acid synthetic defects and PFIC. SGPT markedly elevated could be seen in parenchymal liver disease like hepatitis or metabolic disorders of the liver. And enzymes are moderately elevated by liver cell failure. You have liver cell failure is there, but enzymes are moderately elevated. You can think of GALD or gestational associated albumin liver disease. HIDA scan, it rules out EHBA, but if there is a, suppose there is a transit of the contrast from the liver to the abdomen or to the intestines, you can easily rule out EHBA, because in EHBA, the transit of the contrast from liver to intestine does not happen. It will not happen in EHBA and also in all cases of severe hepatitis. So when the contrast passes into the intestine, you can rule out EHBA. But if it's not passing, you cannot say it is EHBA or any other liver disease. So it only helps you to rule out EHBA if it is a positive scan. Biopsy, liver biopsy is diagnostic in many of the conditions. Like EHBA, you will see bile duct proliferation, bile plugs, lymphocytes in the portal tracts. You can alpha-1 antitrypsin deficiency, you can do a PAS positive inclusions are going to be there. Positive bile ducts could be there in Alagille syndrome. Inclusion bodies could be seen in CMV, and ballooning of hepatocytes are seen in PFIC. So liver biopsy now, I think most of the gastroenterologists are very, very comfortable in doing liver biopsy. If there is not much of liver cell failure, baby is looking well, straight away we can go a liver biopsy and then we can confirm the diagnosis. Many of the cases of cholestasis, if clinically you are not able to make out or you don't have other methods of proving, or even if there are other methods, we will want to confirm with biopsy. So this is a chart which has come up in Indian pediatrics for evaluation of a cholestatic jaundice. We first differentiate into sick or well baby. I already said if a baby is not, if the baby is well, most likely we are dealing with the biliary causes like choledochal cyst, EHBA. EHBA could have both small gallbladder or absent gallbladder. And if it's normal, baby is not looking well, but ultrasound is normal, liver biopsy will help you to rule out EHBA. In a well baby, the stools are pigmented, you have to rule out bile acid synthetic defects as well as PFIC, because GGT is going to be low in this condition. And other metabolic disorders also can present with not sick baby, but having pigmented stools. In the sick baby, we have already discussed that we have to rule out liver cell failure causes, and these includes all the infections. We have discussed that in detail already. If you're thinking of biliary atresia, the earlier you diagnose, better is going to be the outcome. So most of the time you have to do a HIDA scan after 3 days of priming, and if there is excretion, it rules out EHBA, but if there is no excretion, do a liver biopsy, and liver biopsy will confirm the biliary atresia. And however, the gold standard of biliary atresia is para-op cholangiogram, and if it proves, then you have to do a Kasai surgery, which is nothing but photoenterostomy. So that's how we'll approach a case of prolonged cholestatic jaundice. but treatment is going to be supportive. Vitamin and mineral supplementation, you almost give twice the water soluble vitamins are given almost twice the normal doses, and ADK are given almost 10 times the normal doses. But there is a very good chart of these minerals and vitamins in Indian pediatric guidelines, so can look at it. And then we also need to supplement with calcium, phosphorus, and magnesium and iron in cases of cholestatic jaundice. If there is a prolonged cholestasis, even trace elements need to be supplemented. If there is pruritus, we control the pruritus with UDCA, phenobarbital, and rifampicin rarely. When you're feeding these children, you have to ensure that you have to bypass the liver and obtain the maximum calories from MCTs. Specific therapies, Kasai's photoenterostomy for EHBA, treat hypothyroidism, hypopituitarism. Important clues for hypopituitarism is midline defects. You could have cleft lip, cleft palate, hypospidasis, and cholestatic jaundice. Galactosemia, we have already discussed. Feeding induced hypoglycemia, E. coli UTI, liver cell failure, and reducing substance in urine positive galactosemia. Cataract may be there on examination, but sometimes you might have to do a slit lamp to look at oil drop cataract in galactosemia. Tyrosinemia, difficult diagnosis, but if there is a feature of renal tubular acidosis proximal, you can think of this condition. GALT, liver cell failure with moderate enzymes, and immunoglobulins is what you'll give. Galactosemia, we give galactose-free diet. Tyrosinemia, there is a new treatment available, but it's not easily available and it's costly. Bile acid synthetics have defects. Some of them can respond to UDCA and cholic acid supplementation. In speciation, it's only feeding, and then overfeeding that the child is going to improve. Now, with this approach, I will share with you one case study which we have evaluated. It becomes easier to analyze yourself how we approach this case, and tomorrow or later, if you get a case, you will apply the same principles. Here we are looking at a 3-month-old child. I'm sorry, I'm taking beyond neonatal period, but this child started having early jaundice, then continued to have jaundice till 3 months of age. There was yellowish discoloration of the eyes, excessive crying during micturition for the last 4 to 5 days. Normal color stools. Stool color is normal. So we are talking about a well baby with normal color stool. Normal color stools almost always rules out EHBA. Very rare to have EHBA with colored stools. This baby was exclusively breastfed, born to a gravida 2 mother, non-consanguineous couple, normal vaginal delivery, no asphyxia, no neonatal admissions. So that means TPN related cholestasis and other post infections are unlikely. Antenatal period was uncomplicated, and baby or mother are B positive. So it looks like it is nothing to do with prolonged unconjugated jaundice. So there was no rash, no fever, no seizures, and no abnormal movements, and no encephalopathy, revealing that there is no liver cell failure in this baby. No bleeding tendency. Again, coagulopathy is not a clinical coagulopathy is not there in this baby. There is no history of abdominal distension or constipation. Just to tell you that abdominal distension could occur because of liver enlarged or because of gaseous distension or ascites. Chronic liver cell dysfunction can lead to hypoalbuminemia, or a prolonged injury to the liver can cause hypoalbuminemia. If there is constipation and prolonged jaundice, we should think of hypothyroidism again. Previous sibling was healthy. We have already discussed we have to think of PFIC, BRIC, and alpha-1 antitrypsin if there is a recurrence of cholestatic jaundice. On examination, the child looked very active. Sensorium was normal. Vitals were normal. There was moderate jaundice. There were no rashes, no pallor, no petechia, no scratch marks. Always it is difficult to look for scratch marks, but the mother will say that baby is irritable throughout the night. He's moving around head trying to scratch his face onto the mother's body. There is no dysmorphism, no cataract, and anterior and posterior frontal were normal. The baby weight appropriate for age, length, and head circumference also looks normal for this baby at 3 months of age. Liver was 3 centimeters below costal margin, so there was a hepatomegaly. So we are talking about cholestatic jaundice with hepatomegaly. There was no splenomegaly. I'm saying cholestatic jaundice because we are seeing a firm liver here. I didn't say anything about colored stools, but liver hepatomegaly with firm and this jaundice, I thought it is cholestatic jaundice. No splenomegaly, meaning there is no severe hemolysis, no visible veins or ascites. There is no murmur. Murmur could be there in Alagille syndromes. Tone is normal, genitals are normal. So most likely we are not getting clue for hypopituitarism from the clinical examination. This is the baby which I'm talking about. You can see baby looks all right, growing well, and the jaundice looks typical lemon yellow type of thing, and baby has hepatomegaly 3 centimeter below costal margin, firm. There is not much of ascites, there is not much of abdominal distension. Baby looks like a well baby. And this is the color of the stool. So this is not acholic, it's a well colored stool. So here we have a case with prolonged jaundice, firm hepatomegaly, normal stool color, blood group normal, no pallor, no hemolysis, no blood collection. So I'm trying to say that there is no evidence of any prolonged unconjugated jaundice, and the reason for unconjugated jaundice are not there in this child. There was micturition by burning. I've told you that yes, hepatomegaly with burning micturition and with prolonged jaundice could happen with UTI, and UTI presenting for 3 months and then having a cholestatic jaundice is little unlikely, but that should be there in the differentials. There were no other clues for hypothyroidism. The baby was crying excessively, so UTI could be one possibility in this child. So what do? We go and investigate and find out what is the cause of prolonged jaundice in this child. So looks like your direct bilirubin is 3.6 with a total is 8.6. So it's more than 20%, significantly high. So we are now moved from unconjugated to conjugated. We are dealing with a cholestatic jaundice, well baby. Bile salt, bile pigment were positive urine. So it is confirmed case of cholestatic jaundice. SGOT 274, SGPT 137, alkaline phosphatase 492, GGT 24. Less than 50, 25 to 50 is the normal GGT for this age group. So it is in the low normal range, GGT. SGPT is moderately elevated. SGOT is also significantly elevated. So there is elevation of liver enzymes, but GGT looks like it is normal or low normal. Coagulopathy is not there, although APT is prolonged, but PT is not much prolonged. Albumin is 3 grams, which is not very low. 3.5 is normal, but 3 grams is on the not very low for a baby with prolonged cholestasis. Ultrasound abdomen showed mild hepatomegaly with altered echostructure, mild periportal cuffing, diffuse circumferential mural thickening of gallbladder, and there were internal echoes in the gallbladder suggestive of cystitis. In the urinary bladder suggestive of cystitis. So they are saying it is UTI from the liver, UTI from the enzymes, but I said this much elevation of enzymes in UTI is unlikely, and we are seeing a cholestatic jaundice. So if it is a cholestatic jaundice with UTI, what is the diagnosis? Maybe some of you can type in the chat box. Suppose if it is a UTI and cholestatic jaundice, what will be our immediate thoughts which should come into your mind? So Dr. Shastri has already said it could be a case of UTI. Yes, sir. If it is UTI and cholestatic jaundice, what should be our wonderful? So Dr. Boni has said that we have to rule out galactosemia. Wonderful. Galactosemia should always be there in our mind when we are seeing a case of cholestatic jaundice, because stool color could be normal. If stool is pale, rule out EHBA. If stool color is normal and cholestatic, the first thing our mind should be there, that it is a case of galactosemia. Do not sleep unless you get the urine reducing substance, because with galactosemia, its treatment is simple. Galactose free diet will help you in improving the condition of this child. Further investigations, hemoglobin is 9.3, total count is mildly elevated, platelets are normal. That means it doesn't look like a case of hemophagocytosis, because the pancytopenia or bicytopenia and elevated leukocytes or low leukocytes are not seen. CRP is negative, which means bad infections are unlikely in this child. Calcium is 10, GRBS is 84. So there is no hypoglycemia. Blood gas is normal, which means it is not a mitochondrial disorder or organic acidemias. So or a severe sepsis or a liver cell failure. So blood gas normal will rule out almost all the sick conditions in this baby. Cholesterol is 115, again normal. In some conditions of PFIC, there could be hypercholesterolemia. That is why cholesterol was done in this baby. T4 TSH, this was normal in this baby, and that means hyperthyroidism is not the reason for, or hypothyroidism is not the reason for cholestasis in this baby. Sugar and ketones and albumin were not detected in the urine. So no glucosuria, no ketonuria, and no albuminuria. No albuminuria rules out mainly UTI. Ketonuria is not there. So that means it is not a sick child, and pus cells are only 2 to 3 per hyperfil. So it's not even a UTI. So we are dealing with a child who has cholestatic jaundice with elevated liver enzymes, firm hepatomegaly, and on the investigations we have elevated liver enzymes, ultrasound relatively non-contributory, And all that clue we have is only, what is the only clue we have so far? Well baby with hepatomegaly, firm hepatomegaly, elevated liver enzymes. Wonderful. I asked for the clue. Wonderful. Dr. Rashmi, low GGT or normal GGT. You expect the GGT to be elevated, but low GGT is the clue which we have. So low GGT, I said, could be there in two conditions. Which are the two conditions? Wonderful. Dr. Rashmi is listening carefully. So PFIC and bile acid synthetic defects. Wonderful. Okay. PSFI 2, yes. So there is no HIDA scan was done in this child. There was no evidence of any tracer activity in the intestine. So that could give a false impression that it's a case of EHBA. But we have seen that stool color is pale. That means yellow. One can argue that this yellowness is because of the coating of the intestinal layer along the stool. But across the stool, it was yellow, and there was not much of a pallor of the stools. So, but HIDA scan gave a false impression that it could be a case of EHBA. But as I said, the tracer is not seen in the intestine. In other conditions also, when the hepatocyte function is severely impaired. So our interpretation is cholestatic jaundice, prolonged jaundice, cholestasis. We have evidence for that. There is no liver cell failure because there is no coagulopathy and there is no encephalopathy. The causes also not there, like cataract was not there, no acidosis, screen was negative, ferritin was normal in this child. I did not project, but ferritin was normal. So why all these four? Each one was helping us to rule out one condition. So cataract, acidosis, which one? What condition? No acidosis means what I wanted to rule out? Liver cell failure and severe acidosis. Tyrosinemia, okay. Yeah, mitochondrial disorders. Mitochondrial disorders have lactic acidosis. Then screen negative. So all the infections are almost out. Normal ferritin, I said, which condition rules out? Normal ferritin rules out which conditions? GALD and even phagocytosis. HLH, correct. Both can be ruled out because in both these conditions, ferritin is going to be elevated. Ultrasound showed no choledochal cyst, no inspissation, and no carotid disease. EHBA, the baby is well baby, liver is enlarged, stool color normal, so little unlikely. No dysmorphism, so it's not allegedly. No acidosis, no rash, no splenomegaly. That means it's not infection, nor IM, nor torch. So what is it? One by one, we have ruled out all the conditions. So what are we dealing with? So the clue was right. So the clue said it was a case of low GGT. So low GGT could be then in the condition the baby was started on UDCA and cholic acid and exome sequencing was sent. So the exome sequencing report came as PFSE type 2. PFSE type 2 was a diagnosis which was made in this child, and the child was homozygous for PFSE type 2. These children, very few of them may respond to UDCA, but they may respond to liver cell transplant. So liver transplant. So we have offered a liver transplant for this child. The child is scheduled for a liver transplant. Hopefully the child is going to do well after the liver transplant. There are a lot of donations which are now coming up because you have crowdfunding, you have many methods of helping these children. So I hope this child gets a liver biopsy and improves out of it. This child's genetic diagnosis came as PFSE type 2. So that was an interesting case of cholestatic prolonged jaundice. Now I will end the presentation by showing you one more spotter, and you need to make the diagnosis from the spotter. I'll see how many of you will give the diagnosis. There are a lot of clues in this case. So this child came at 14 days of life, and this was this child came to the OPD.
Hypothyroid.
So please write the findings so that we can come to the etiology. Findings, please. All of you are giving diagnosis, findings. Not much of dysmorphism. Very good. At least somebody said okay. Can all of you see the prolonged jaundice or not? There is jaundice in this baby. Mild jaundice hue is still there. Yes, there is abdominal fullness. So there was difficulty in passing stool. The baby had a lot of aerophagia, but no organomegaly. There is some umbilical hernia. Wonderful. Dr. Niranjan has looked at carefully. There is mottling of the skin on the lower limbs. So you can see the cutis marmorata. Cutis marmorata, abdominal distension, umbilical hernia, and prolonged jaundice. What else you need? You don't need any other clue. So Dr. Niranjan spotter wise, he told that it is a case of hypothyroidism. So don't miss these children. Any case of prolonged unconjugated jaundice, take it as an opportunity to screen for hypothyroidism. All cases of cholestatic jaundice, well babies rule out, well or sick babies rule out galactosemia, and in well babies, cholestatic jaundice rule out THBA, and liver cell failure, don't forget herpes, galled as important differentials, because you need to think of treatable causes of cholestatic jaundice or liver cell failure or prolonged unconjugated jaundice. UTI, I have said, is important diagnosis when you have prolonged unconjugated jaundice with elevated liver enzymes. Thank you.
Excellent presentation, Dr. Murki. Do not sleep before you get urine reducing substances done. Very catchy. And this opportunity of getting hypothyroid done, because treatment of hypothyroid, if it started within 2 to 3 weeks, then brain is saved. After 3 weeks, permanent brain damage can occur. So excellent presentation, Dr. Murki. I will have a few questions from the audience. Dr. Sachin Verma has asked the dose of phenobarbital in case of prolonged jaundice, and also he has asked, is there any change in the bilirubin level? Is absolute bilirubin 1 milligram or more than 1 milligram conjugated can be taken as a conjugated jaundice significant in new protocol?
So yeah, I think anything more than 1.5 milligram per deciliter people are considering as a cholestatic jaundice. But see, you have to take everything into picture. I already said that if you have jaundice with pale stools, you don't need any more tests.
Yes.
So it's almost confirmatory.
So his question is mainly whether there is any change in AIMS protocol. It is written the same which you said, that up to 5, 1 milligram, more than 5, 20% of the total. Is
Yes.
there any change in that? Absolute number is there any absolute number?
Yeah,
like
there
1?
there is sir. 1.5, anything above 1.5, they're saying.
Okay. And dose of phenobarbital?
We give about 3 to 5 milligram per kg once daily for 5 days. This is very useful for Crigler-Najjar type 2 because they respond dramatically to this condition. And the only thing is, this jaundice, if you give phenobarbital, you have to wait at least 4 to 5 days before the liver enzyme start working on the liver enzymes.
Okay, sir. Dr. Deepti has asked, when there is bilirubin very high in the range of exchange transfusion unconjugated, the conjugated bilirubin ratio also rises. So, but if it does not cross 20%, even if it crosses, what we should do?
Nothing. You treat in the first 1 week, you treat only unconjugated jaundice. We don't even consider the conjugated fraction for treatment of severe jaundice in the first 1 week. All jaundice in the first 1 week, well baby, is considered to be unconjugated because all the treatment guidelines are based on total bilirubin and not based on unconjugated bilirubin.
Right. As you have discussed about this dysmorphism, one question is on genitalia deformity. What type of jaundice is associated with genitalia? One you have said hypothyroidism. Any other?
Hypopituitarism, sir. Hypopituitarism.
Hypopituitarism, yes.
Hypospadiasis, midline defects, hypoglycemia, and cholestatic jaundice.
All right, sir. So one entity, this question is from my side. One entity we used to have a neonatal hepatitis, which was treated with the steroids. So where this has disappeared or shrunk, where this is gone, idiopathic hepatitis of the newborn?
Now, what happened is we have got lot of paraphernalia to diagnose the diseases now, sir.
Okay.
So when I did my MD, either EHBA or idiopathic hepatitis used to be the differentials. But now I think with the extensive workup, which we have now facilities for, many of them are non-invasive. So you have a panel, clinical exome sequencing for cholestatic jaundice. They look for almost all the genetic causes of cholestatic jaundice. Liver biopsy has become much more easier now. So you can do a OPD liver biopsy and then get the diagnosis done. So because with improved facilities for diagnosis, I think idiopathic has become less and less.
Okay, sir. One question is, what are the indications of HIDA scan? Was it needed in the case we discussed?
Yeah, I think it's a very difficult question to answer, but always, all cases with cholestatic jaundice, especially in a well baby, we don't want to rule out, we always want to rule out EHBA, but this child definitely, I would say that you could have avoided also, because stool color was totally not suggestive. But contrary, when we did the HIDA scan, the tracer was there in the intestine, tracer was not there in the intestine. So it didn't follow the clinical course.
Okay. So Dr. Deepti Bajaj has again asked why direct component is high when bilirubin, total bilirubin is high.
So obviously this the conjugated the amount of bilirubin load on the liver increases, and then if there is, it's like a traffic jam. So inspection is good.
Okay. So Dr. Neeta Khanna has asked from Moradabad, please tell about lactate level in mitochondrial defects. Are they increased in bile acid defects?
Bile acid synthetic defects, no sir. Only in mitochondrial disorders they go very high, and in fact I said more than 90 milligram per deciliters of lactate levels, you can straight away close your eyes and say this is a mitochondrial disorder.
Okay. Dr. Subramania has asked vitamin K dosing in neonatal cholestasis.
2 to 5 mg, sir.
Vitamin K.
2 to 5 mg.
Yes. One question from my side. This G6PD is not uncommon, and vitamin K causes hemolysis. So that can cause sometimes even encephalopathy, bilirubin encephalopathy. So should we keep on giving vitamin K to every newborn, or we only choose down to low birth weights?
As a prophylaxis, sir?
Yes, as a prophylaxis.
No, sir. Every child with who is born in the hospital should get a vitamin K, because the dose of vitamin K which we give is unlikely to cause hemolysis.
Okay.
Mega dose of vitamin K may cause hemolysis, but 1 milligram, 0.5 milligram is unlikely to cause the hemolysis, even in severe G6PD.
Okay. So jaundice, just 1 minute. There's one question from Kiran Goplani. Jaundice can raise liver enzymes in a case of intracranial hemorrhage. Are we justified giving supplements like in cholestasis?
Any jaundice, cholestatic jaundice with elevated liver enzymes, you have to supplement, sir.
Okay.
Because one should define cholestasis, you have to give ADEK and the double the dose of water soluble vitamins and mineral supplementation.
Dr. Priyanka Gupta has asked any scenario where urine reducing substance can be false negative.
Which I think she's asking whether if you have a baby with galactosemia and urine reducing substance are negative, if you have not fed the baby.
Oh.
So if what happens is what happens is the baby is very sick, cholestasis was there, liver cell failure has set in, the baby is treated other hospital, they put him on IV fluids for 3-4 days, or then the baby comes to you. By the time the galactose levels are low, and there could be a pseudo improvement in the baby, and urine reducing substance could
Apart from this, Dr. Murki, a delay in breastfeeding is considered one of the factors for prolonged jaundice. Similarly, breastfeeding itself is a risk factor listed in the prolongation of jaundice. So how do you see this as a controversial thing? And also philosophically, you have already said breast milk jaundice, we should avoid saying this.
I don't like the word breast milk jaundice at all, because I feel it's a wrong connotation which goes to the family. For healthcare workers, we may understand, but parents don't understand. A lot of crucifixion occurs. Then the mother is blamed and things like that happen. So I don't want to use this word breast milk jaundice, because it gives that you stop the milk, everything is going to become all right. No.
Wonderful. Our professor 35 years back, Dr. Indu Vaklu used to say there should be nothing like breast milk jaundice.
Yeah.
And she was right.
I
So,
totally agree with her,
yes.
and I think we should all go with her.
And one more thing, does the components composition of flora, microflora in breast milk, does it has to do something with breast milk jaundice?
It could be, sir. There are many causes. Nobody knows the exact reason, but many things in breast milk. There are many reasons for breast milk jaundice. But
Okay.
you treat the jaundice, don't stop the milk.
Okay.
That's the message.
Dr. Kalyan
Breastfeeding
has
jaundice
asked,
is not because of breastfeeding. It is
Yeah.
because of poor breastfeeding.
yes, so it is the, okay. So the role of IVIG in ice immunization, Dr. Kalyan Chakravarti.
Yeah, I think GALD, if it is a GALD, you approve GALD, 30% of this GALD can improve with IVAG.
He has also, okay, good. Dr. Karan Gopalani has how on ABG we can think of mitochondrial and organic acidemias. And the another question I will add, that why we are not utilizing serum pH. High pH is related to prolongation of jaundice. So serum pH, is it underutilized in the cause of? So first of all, question from Kiran, how ABG can we think of mitochondrial or organic acidemias?
So organic acidemias also have lactate elevated, but the lactate elevation in organic acidemia is usually between 10 to 90. So if it is more than 90, it gives a clue that it could be mitochondria. Some mitochondria could still have less than 90, but more than 90, it favors a mitochondrial disorder.
Okay. So high pH is related to prolongation of jaundice of high pH of serum and high similarly protein binding. So pH of serum, are we using it as a parameter?
So no, sir, those are important because they help in transfer of bilirubin to the brain. So
Yeah.
acidosis, using of drugs, they cause not increased jaundice, but the unconjugated jaundice bilirubin reaches the brain faster by damaging the blood-brain barrier. So they become important risk factors for connectors, not for prolonged jaundice.
There's a question from Dr. Deepti Bajaj, right from the heart of the pediatrician and neurologist on duty. If jaundice is high in exchange transfer range, whether we should give intensive phototherapy first and wait, and for how many hours?
So any jaundice where you are worried that you need an exchange,
Yeah.
you should give intensive phototherapy till you get the till you organize for the blood transfusion or exchange
Maybe
transfusion.
we can repeat in 2 to 4 hours also.
So normally it takes about 4 hours, sir, to organize for exchange transfusion anywhere in the world.
Yeah.
Because you need to take the sample of the mother, baby, send for cross match, get the blood ready, and irradiate the blood. All this is going to take about 3-4 hours. During that time, you give intensive phototherapy. After giving intensive phototherapy, if the levels are dropping, baby is well baby, and exchange levels, it has gone below exchange level, or if there was a dehydration, you correct the dehydration, things are improving, you can continue intensive phototherapy. But it's static or rising, you go ahead and do exchange transfusion, because high jaundice, prolonged duration will lead to problems.
Couple of more questions, Dr. Murki, because you are a celebrity here in neonatology and you are Rajnikant of neonatology, I would say. So, nutritional management of galactosemic baby, Vishnu Anand is asking.
Nutritional management of galactosemic baby is giving galactose-free diet, other supplements, vital and mineral and vitamin supplements. Mainly don't forget to add on the calcium supplementation when you're doing the galactose-free diets. Now, it's very difficult to treat the galactosemic children because although it's very important diagnosis to make, but they have short stature, failure to thrive, hypogonadism. So many of these children in the long term, they could have problems related to galactosemia. But if you start early diet and they take care of nutrition, take care of mineral deficiencies, maybe we can work on better on these children.
Okay, one question from Dr. Bonnie Baraccio. If I'm reading it, I am not able to understand it. Cholestasis baby with HSPDA with deranged enzymes. How to treat the PDA?
Hemodynamically significant PDA with
PDA,
deranged
yes.
enzymes.
Okay,
So treat the cause. Most likely it is infection. Most of the time, PDA and cholestatic jaundice must have caused by infection, mostly Klebsiella, E. coli. they have the primary cause is infection. So if you treat infection, both of them will improve.
Okay. So a couple of more questions. Vitamin D in cholestatic jaundice. What is the terfimidine and halo-1 role of in pruritus and its role in pruritus? Naloxone.
I don't know, sir.
Vitamin D. This is question is from Subramania. He can clarify the question. What is terfenadine and its role in pruritus? Okay. What are the clues suggestive of herpes infection, sir, from Dr. Rashmi?
Okay, I already said any baby who is well at birth, herpes is a perinatal infection. That means it occurs at the time of birth. So if infection occurs, it takes at least 4 to 5 days of incubation period is required for a disseminated presentation. So we do not diagnose herpes in the first 5 days of, if there is a liver cell failure in the first 5 days, herpes is unlikely. I would think of GALD as an important differential there. But if the liver cell failure presents after 5 days, baby has hepatomegaly, liver cell failure, coagulopathy, proteinuria, and elevated liver enzymes, then herpes should be considered as important differential. Sometimes there could be preceding viral respiratory infections, like baby has a running nose, mild noisy breathing, or family members could be affected. So, or mother could, the obstetrician could tell that there were herpetic lesions. Then these conditions, you can think of it, but the clues I think is after 5 days if you have liver cell failure. Entire neonatal period you have to think of herpes as a differential.
Okay, sir. One of the last questions from Dr. Niranjan Kumar Singh. Prophylactic phototherapy for ELBW babies and for how long?
So this topic has been researched. There is a study which is published in NEGM a few years back. It had given a very conflicting reports. So don't use prophylactic phototherapy for any baby. The baby has jaundice, then only use phototherapy in extreme babies, in ELBW babies.
Okay, Dr. Murki, thank you very much for excellent presentation. One more thing I would say, if the baby is discharged from the hospital early discharge after normal delivery, or if the time of discharge baby is having slight jaundice, how to follow it up, whether we should test for jaundice at the time of discharge or just follow it up?
So
Two
there are
situations.
simple rules now, sir. All babies who are discharged within 24 hours should be seen on 3rd or 4th day.
Right.
All babies discharged within 24 hours should be seen on 3rd, 4th day for evaluation of jaundice, if it is early discharge. But if it is delayed discharge, that is after 48 hours you are discharging, you have multiple methods of screening. One of them is a transcutaneous. But if you don't have a transcutaneous, you can do a bilirubin. But if you don't have a bilirubin, there are scorings. There are risk factor scorings which you can use to evaluate. And most important is visible jaundice should be there for
Yes.
for you to do a screening test.
Right. And but just one last question: are we sometimes utilizing, or it is useful to have N-tidal carbon monoxide?
We have done a multicentric trial in India, and we don't find it useful. It doesn't add anything to the etiology or the management of jaundice.
Thank you very much, Dr. Murki. Thank you very much, and thank you very much, the interactive audience. Excellent responses from audience. Over to Dr. Akash Pandita.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir, for being with us and sparing time from your busy schedule. I know how busy sir is. So thank you so much, sir. Thanks
Thank you,
a lot.
Akash. Thank you so much.
It was a pleasure having you with us. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night, sir.
Good night, everyone.
Good night, everyone. Good night, Dr. Murki. Attendance was nearly 100.